Hinesville, Part 13. Vivian, Cooper, and Lane watched as a team of agents from an unknown agency began to unload their gear. Vivian knew they were identified as FBI, but she had a hard time believing it, especially since none of them were wearing anything that said FBI. Cooper and Vivian walked to the front of Nate's unit. Cooper sat on the edge of the bumper and Vivian leaned against the fender and crossed her arms. Lane noted the two looked at every person who entered the building. "Did you recognize any of them?" Cooper questioned Vivian as the last person walked by. "Did I jump any of them, tearing them limb from limb with my bare hands?" Vivian asked in return with a glare intended for other parties. Cooper chucked at her comment and shook his head as they walked toward the side of the unit. "I didn't either." Both of them returned to the side of the SUV, waiting for Nate to finish so they could leave. Vivian looked over at Lane and put her hands on her hips. "I really am sorry that I snapped at you the way I did." "I know, Viv, it's long been forgotten." Lane responded with a sense of understanding. "I appreciate it." Vivian lit another cigarette, trying to shake the feeling of uneasiness. Lane thought for a moment, recalling his return from the war and his short stint as a POW. It takes part of you with it, and he knew how they felt. "I hope y'all don't take this the wrong way. I love working with you too." "Viv, you and me go way back." Lane watched them both nod, waiting on what he had to say. "But y'all have changed since." Lane trailed off, but they knew what he meant. Cooper sighed and looked at Lane. "Weird shit has been happening since that crap, and when they happen over and over, to both of us, it's not a coincidence or a fluke." Vivian looked over at Cooper with a sense of betrayal. "What do you mean?" Lane was a little dubious, but he knew Vivian and he knew how she noticed things. Vivian shook her head. "Never mind, man. It's not important." "No, what is it?" Lane stepped toward Vivian as she shed her jacket. "It's nothing. Just let it go." Vivian brushed it off, begging Lane internally to let it slide. Lane wanted to say something, but Nate walked up, so he decided to wait. He knew Vivian and Nate had gotten close, but she would more likely talk to him alone. The crew of 4 headed back to Statesboro and joined Mason there. Most of the trip was pretty quiet. Vivian and Cooper weren't much for talking this go-around. Lane sat with Vivian in the back seat and decided he hadn't seen her this bad off since she came back to work after Jake, her husband, died. "So, how is it for you?" Vivian walked over to Mason as they entered the FBI office in Statesboro. "After Ben got a call, I was quickly removed from the site." Mason sighed and chuckled in disgust. He shook his head and continued, "And then Ben told me we weren't supposed to be there to begin with." "Yeah, isn't that an awesome feeling?" Cooper mocked a grin. Lane walked up and joined the 3. "Do y'all know what's going on?" "I'm guessing we're going home." Vivian chuckled and turned to Lane. "I don't know what they are waiting on." "Why did they take us off the case?" "Someone had their head up their ass." Vivian was disgusted and angry that she would be put in this situation so quickly. "We weren't supposed to be on this case to begin with." "That doesn't explain why they took us off." Lane was just as angry as they were. "It's some kind of Uber-fed site. We were never supposed to set foot in it, much less work a case there." Vivian could see Lane show a sense of understanding. "Welcome to the land of the uninformed." Cooper chuckled and patted him on the back. "It was a Park Service office. We needed a clearance to be in." Vivian and Cooper walked off together to go outside and enjoy a cigarette. Lane waited for them to leave the building and then turned to Mason. "She's bad off. This seems to have set her back." "I noticed." Mason kept his eye on the two through the window they were standing in front of. "Cooper tried to get between me and Vivian. Don't let him pull her away from us." Lane informed Mason, who nodded as they watched the two through a window. Lane continued to observe the pair as he thought about what had happened in South Carolina. "They're getting suspicious, and they're figuring things out. And I want a check run on Cooper. I want to know where he was before Hinesville." Lane ordered Mason. Mason looked over at Lane, surprised by his comment. "What do you want?" "Everything. Their suspicions are well-founded, considering what we're doing." Lane thought about all of the extra duties his team had now. "I know y'all are busting your asses, but there's something about Cooper that doesn't seem right." "What do you mean? Do you think they know about me?" Mason asked, now concerned. I know it has a lot to do with what they went through, but they're getting suspicious about everything, Lane reported, his demeanor more authoritative. They feel like they are out of the loop, and from what they mentioned today, they're finding things out. We need to handle that, and they, at least Vivian, I think, feel alone and like no one else understands. It's a hard place to be. Lane was hurting for Vivian. They had been friends for too long for it to be any other way. Yes, sir. Mason got the impression Lane was speaking from experience. We need to make them feel like they have someone on their side, who understands. Lane ordered him and walked off. Mason left to give the orders to Ben and Nate. I'm so ready to get home. Vivian looked over at Cooper as they stood outside in the warmth of the mid-fall morning. I am, too. You're all moved in, aren't you? Cooper questioned, hoping the movers had made it to Richmond Hill already. Sure, and Davy dropped my truck and the unit off at my new house. She nodded and took a drag of her cigarette. He was thinking about how he was going to miss having her so close, like in Hinesville. I'm going to have to move to Richmond Hill, just so we can still hang out like we do. Vivian smiled as she paced slowly by the ashtray. It wouldn't hurt. Everyone else is, except Ben. There's something that I was thinking about doing while I was off. Vivian changed the subject. She wanted to talk about something she had been considering, since she knew she was going to be off this week. Cooper looked over her shoulder to see Ben and Nate walking up with Mason and Lane trailing behind. Hold that thought. Damage control is on the way out. Vivian turned to see Nate and Ben walking out of the front doors and seemingly over to them. What's going on, guys? Vivian noted their demeanor seemed official and not relaxed, like a friend would be approaching another. We were sent to extend the apologies of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and to release you to go home. Ben could easily see the uneasiness of the two. What have we been waiting for 2 hours for? Cooper knew there was more to it than what they were telling them. To be released. They were deciding if you needed to be debriefed, Nate replied, and all of them could see Vivian tense. It's a good thing they said no. Vivian instantly turned rigid in expression and stance. Why do you say that? Nate wanted her to say it, even though they all knew it anyway. They would have had a fight on their hands. Vivian growled, and the two paced in their spots. Nate nodded, knowing she was serious. I am going to take home whoever is going to Hinesville, and Lane can take you to Richmond Hill if you guys want to go there. I'm going to Hinesville, Cooper imparted to the two agents over his shoulder as he turned away. I'm going to Richmond Hill. Vivian turned to Lane. My stuff was moved while we were in South Carolina. Ben smiled, noticing the stress on the two was very obvious. Great. We'll see you after your vacation. Now, I like the sound of that. Vivian sighed and walked over to Nate's unit to get her gear. Okay. Vivian met Lane at the edge of the parking lot. Cooper watched as Vivian retrieved her gear and ran over to Lane's unit. See y'all in a week. Vivian waved to the four. Ben turned to the building. We have to go do a couple of things, but we won't be long. The two federal agents walked back into the office. We're going to go visit on Tuesday? Ben questioned Nate. Nate knew that waiting those few days would be too long. How about we go tomorrow? I don't want this to sit that long. That sounds good. I don't think she's in a real good place right now. Ben nodded and recalled what Nate had said about how they were at the scene. With that, the men walked in the building and tied up the loose ends. Vivian climbed in the front seat with Lane. Lane got them on the road, but he was still worried about her. Are you guys doing all right? Lane watched as Vivian barely flinched at the question, her body so rigid from the thought of everything today. It seemed like she would never relax. Vivian continued looking out the window at the scenery going by. As good as can be expected, she answered passively, and then looked back out the window. That's not really an answer, Lane announced as he turned into a parking lot. Vivian wondered what Lane was doing. What are you doing? She knew how well Lane knew her, and just for that moment she wished he didn't. I know what you're going through. Lane found a spot and put the SUV in park. Vivian looked at him quizzically. She knew Lane served in the Marines and that he did 3 tours between Iraq and Afghanistan, but didn't know much more than that. I was a POW in Iraq, Lane confessed, staring out the front windshield. It was for about 18 hours, and the guys found me pretty quick considering, but it was the longest 18 hours of my life. I didn't know that, Lane. The regret Vivian felt was overwhelming, but he never offered up that information. The reason I brought this up is I kind of know how you feel. Lane glanced over at Vivian. He meant this more so for her than for Cooper. You both feel like no one else gets it, and it's a very lonely place to be. Vivian nodded as he spoke. She knew Lane really got it now. We're here for you guys, we always will be. Go to counseling, it does eventually help. Lane sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. I wish I could give you some pearl of wisdom that would take it all away, but I can't. It just erodes over time. Thanks, Lane. Vivian knew he had the best of intentions at heart. The other guys don't know about Iraq, and I'd like to keep it that way if you don't mind, Lane mentioned. I'm not going to say anything. You have my word on that, Vivian assured Lane. Lane nodded and put the SUV back into drive.